Hey guys, it's Kevin Anderson for the season finale of Better Call Saul, Season 1, Episode 10, Marco. And this was by far the best episode of the season. I mean, one of the things about this episode is that a lot did not happen in this episode, but a lot did happen in this episode. And no, not a lot happened in terms of like death or nobody was killed, nobody was murdered in this episode. Nothing like that happened. But that's because Better Call Saul is not that kind of show. This show is about Jimmy's arc, and it's really showing that perfectly here and I can't wait to see where next season goes. Every episode of this season has gone better and better, and this was by far the best episode. Let's just get into it because it was amazing. So we start off the episode with what might just be our best flashback we've ever had in Better Call Saul. I loved this flashback. We go back to Chicago 10 years ago, and this is after Jimmy has been released from prison and, Chuck got him out of there. And basically, we see that basically Jimmy has stopped by this local bar to say farewell to Marco. We see the man we see him pulling the Fox Rolex scam with in Hero. Marco's happy to see him. We get a lot more focus on their friendship overall, which I really like seeing here. And basically, Marco's really happy to see him, but then he realizes that Jimmy's leaving, and he sees that Chuck is outside in the cab waiting to take him to Albuquerque, where he's got Jimmy working a job in the mailroom, which we know it's not going to work out for him, but we're happy for him at the same time. I mean, and Marco's really upset. He thinks that, basically that Chuck was the one that did this to him and that Chuck is making him do this. But Jimmy says that this was not Chuck's doing. This was all Jimmy just wanting to turn his life around. And Chuck can do, and, Marco can do it too, but he doesn't want to. In fact, he tells Jimmy that he doesn't need to turn his life around. Because he's slipping Jimmy and he doesn't need to change. And Jimmy tells him that it's time for him to grow up. And basically, he says, for me and you, asking Marco if he wants to spend the rest of his life on the bar stool, which honestly, that's the worst thing for him to do. And basically, he says that Chuck is not making him do this. He's giving an opportunity and he's grabbing it. He's doing this himself. And basically, he tells Marco he's leaving. He's moving to Albuquerque to work in the mailroom. And Jimmy's mind is made up, and basically, even though he's arguing that this is a waste of time, that's not going to do anything for him, and that he's really good at being a con man, he tells him that his mind is made up, and he leaves. And it's a really sad scene, but you understand that Jimmy had to do that, and it just was great to see Jimmy do that. That really, because I mean, he wanted to turn his life around, and he did. And then we go back to the prize. Now, I was very interested in seeing what was going to happen next week. After last week's cliffhanger, I was very interested in seeing where we were going to go. I mean, last week's cliffhanger was amazing when we found out that Chuck, turned against Jimmy and told Hamlin to fire him. I was very interested in seeing where we were going to go after that. And we see that Jimmy pays Hamlin a visit to officially hand over the Sandpiper Crossing case to HHM. He's very calm about it as well, which I really like seeing. And basically, I thought that was really good. And he tells Kim he's giving HHM the Sandpiper case because of Chuck, and he asks why she didn't tell him Chuck was the reason he was blocked from the job of the firm. And, I wonder that as well, because obviously that's what Hamlin told her. And she tells him that she didn't tell him that because she didn't want him hating his own brother. And basically, he goes to Hamlin's office, and Hamlin tells Jimmy he never wanted to go like this. And we really start to see this compassion for Hamlin. We start to see that Hamlin really does care about Jimmy, and I like seeing this because, I mean, all this season, Hamlin's been the big antagonist in Jimmy's life, but now we're starting to see a definitely more caring side of Hamlin, and I really like seeing this, definitely. And he's prompting Jimmy to apologize for having called him a pig or fucker, which I thought was really funny. And Howard then gives Jimmy a check for $20,000 and the promise of 20% of future results from the case. And basically, in turn, because of him doing this, he gives him the list of errands that he be performing daily for Chuck. And I thought it was great that he did this because I didn't really know if he even gave a shit anymore. I mean, when he bailed on Chuck, I thought he was done with helping out Chuck, but no, we see that he really does care about him. And Hamlin is very surprised at how much Jimmy is dedicated, how dedicated he is to Chuck. He never realized they had this connection and realized that Jimmy really cared about Chuck. He didn't really think he cared about anything. And he reminds Jimmy that he always had a soft spot for him and tells him that he used to call him Charlie Hustle. And Jimmy replies that he remembers in the HHM parking garage. And I just thought that was overall just a really good scene. I like seeing this more caring side of Hamlin. I'm interested in seeing if we're going to see more of that. I definitely feel like next season we're going to see a much more caring side of Hamlin. And he tells Jimmy that he'll take care of Chuck going forward. And I really love that overall. So Then we see that he apologized to Kim for yelling at her when she advised him to take Hamlin's deal because he did yell at her about that and he's upset about it and everything. So she gives him a hug, complimenting him on how maturely he's handling the situation with Chuck because he didn't realize how he was going to handle it. She didn't think that he would handle it in a good way, and we see that he has, and I love that. So basically, we then see, after that, though, we get to what might just be the funniest scene in the entire show so far. This scene was absolutely hilarious. And one of the things I love is that Bob Odenkirk perfectly showed the emotion in the pain and also his wits in this scene. That was what was amazing here. I loved how the scene could be really emotional, but it's actually very funny, and I love that. So as usual, Jimmy's calling numbers for the crowd and everything. They're really loving it, and he's trying to preside over the festivities as usual, but he's really bitter. And of course, all the letters end up being B, and he starts saying, like, B is for betrayal, B is for brother, and he starts giving these, like, long speeches about him. I just love the crowd's reaction. They're all completely dead faced, they have no idea what's going on, and, he ends up talking about this rant against Albuquerque and the revelation of more backstory. Back in Chicago, Jimmy saw the car of Chet, a guy who had slept with his ex-wife, double parked outside of Dairy Queen. And I don't know who Jimmy's ex-wife was, but I mentioned seeing maybe what's going on there. Maybe we'll see that in season 2. Jimmy climbed up on the roof of the auto drop trow and defecated through the sunroof. And basically, he tells him that it wasn't his finest hour, and he says he wants some soft serve, so he gave him some soft serve. But what would have gotten him slapped with relatively minor charges in other circumstances turned quite serious. Because unbeknownst to Jimmy, Chet's two sons were in the back seat, and there was a level of tint on the window that he'll maintain to this day is illegal in an Illinois licensed vehicle. And additionally, Chet was connected to in Chicago, so the DA was convinced to pursue indecent exposure charges against Jimmy, branding him as sex offender. And basically, I loved this line here. What he said, "One little Chicago summer from some Liam Charles Manson." And he's like, that's where it all went off the rails. I've been paying for it ever since. That's why I'm here. And I thought that was just overall a really funny scene. You see the look on the crowd. They are all dead faced. They have no idea what to say here. I mean, what do you say to that? And basically, he's talking about how this led up to trumped up charges of indecent exposure, the same charges that the same charges that Chuck had to fly to Illinois to clear, and he says he's been paying for it ever since. And I love the way he's just like, kitty notebooks for everyone. He's like, grab your kitty notebooks, and he literally drops the microphone, and that was so funny. I thought that was hilarious. So basically, we then see that he finds he goes back to his hometown in Chicago, and he's back to seeing Marco, and we see that Marco is exactly how he left him. That's two haven't seen each other since Jimmy moved to Albuquerque, but Marco is thrilled to see him. He hasn't seen him in years, and Jimmy comments that he had been in town before for his mother's funeral 2 years earlier, but he didn't have the time to check on his friend. And Marco is very disappointed. I mean, he wasn't there to see Marco, probably because he just wanted him to turn his life around. I feel like that's really what it was about. And we see that Marco really hasn't changed at all. He's still asleep on a stool, and basically, Marco works for his brother-in-law's standpipe business, which apparently allows him to be asleep at the bar at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday. And he's crushed when, he's really upset when Jimmy tells him, what he told him. And basically, Jimmy decides to cheer him up because he can see that he's really upset by that. And basically, he tells him they eventually fall back into old patterns, and they basically, he talks about how there is this to convince a businessman to pay 110 to $100 for a candy half dollar, and that leads to this great montage. I mean, at first we're not sure if Marco's actually going to do it because he said, I'll leave you to think, and we realize that he is going to do that, and we get back to them scheming, and I thought it was overall just really funny here. For a while, I thought that's what we were going to be next season, that Jimmy was just going to go back to Slip and Jimmy and work with Marco. I thought that's really what we were going to see here, and basically we see this great montage of basically they're scamming this obnoxious businesswoman by concocting an elaborate story to sell him a rare half-dollar coin for a very, did I say businesswoman, I mean businessman, a rare half-dollar coin for a very high price, and it works. And off this, the pair spend the next several days pulling one successful scam after another. It's such a fun scene to watch, and I loved it. It was by far one of the highlights of the episode. So a few days later, Jimmy wakes up in Marco's apartment, and we can see that, they're performing these scams and everything. And basically, I really love seeing this. It was just a lot of fun to see. Definitely one of the high points of the episode. So a few days later, Jimmy wakes up in Marco's apartment, and there's this disappointed waitress who was under the impression that she had gone home the night before with Kevin Costner, and Jimmy tries to charm her as she and her friend flee the scene. And as he gets dressed, his cell phone falls out of his pocket, and he checks his voicemail for the first time, and he has message after message from current and potential clients inquiring about Jimmy's elder law services. And Jimmy decides that he needs to tell Marco this. He finally tells Marco that he's a lawyer and it's time for him to go back to Albuquerque. And Marco is simply amazed. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, get out of the fact that, just don't think about the fact that Jimmy eventually becomes Saul. Let's just think of Jimmy how it used to be, as Slip and Jimmy. Who would have thought that guy would have become, who would have thought that guy would have become a lawyer? Like, who would have thought that? And Marco is shocked, and you really feel bad for Marco. I mean, Jimmy really wanted him to turn his life around, but you see that Marco, he's just gone on this bad path, and he hasn't really turned his life around at all. And I really felt bad for him in this scene, definitely. And basically, he sees that Jimmy is a lawyer now, and basically, Marco, he still thinks that this is Chuck's fault. He thinks that's why this is happening because Chuck made him do this, and basically he says it's the ultimate way to scam folks out of their money, but Jimmy explains that he's not ripping anybody off, and he's building a legitimate practice with clients who depend on him. And Marco isn't able to talk Jimmy into staying into Chicago for the long term because he thinks that maybe he should do that and, scam with him and work on that because he just wants some sort of direction in his life. That's really what I thought we were trying to see here, is that Marco just wants direction. He wants some sort of, something in his life, just anything, any sort of job, because he has nothing. He doesn't have anything. He doesn't have anyone that, I mean, he has people that appreciate him, but he doesn't have a job. He doesn't have a successful career. He's so much not like Jimmy, and he begs Jimmy to stay for one more grift. He has one of the fake Rolexes left, from episode 4 that we saw, and basically he thinks the two of them can score their highest profit ever, maybe even get $1,000 for it. And he tells Jimmy that, his standpipes isn't cutting it for him and he's got nothing. And he basically tells him that he is nothing without this. And it is we get this really great scene here where basically I was wondering if Jimmy was actually going to do this. I mean, for a while you think, okay, maybe Jimmy's not going to do this. And then I was thinking, well, maybe Jimmy might just do this for the rest of the season. Maybe Jimmy will just go back into scamming with Marco, because I really didn't know where we were going with the season finale. But then we see that they repeat the Rolex watch scam, and Marco's waiting in the alley when he hears the signal. Jimmy and the victim are howling in the middle of the night, and as Jimmy and the victim approach, they find Marco unconscious. And honestly, this scene was probably one of the saddest scenes I've seen in a while. And just like planned, Jimmy pokes him with a stick, but this time around, Marco does not respond. And Jimmy realizes that Marco is actually unconscious, and he's trying to call an ambulance as the victim runs off with Marco's money, which really sucks. And Marco then wakes up suffering from a heart attack, and he basically tells him that. And just this line right here killed me. I loved this next scene. I loved this whole scene, and honestly, here's the thing. I understand this wasn't a huge character or anything. Like, Marco was never a huge character. I'm not saying, like, I was attached to Marco's character or anything, but I will say that this has to be one of the saddest death scenes I have seen in a very long time, and especially from a supporting character, a character that we don't usually see. It just really shows how good this show is, and especially because Jimmy cared about him so much, and you really care about Marco. And I mean, this episode got us to care about him because you want him to turn his life around, and I want him to turn his life around. I was hoping that Jimmy would be able to get him to turn his life around, and maybe even give him a job, maybe show him that this is not the end. And basically, we see that he notices Marco isn't really, he's calling 911, and Marco regains consciousness long enough to tell Jimmy probably one of these. This line was so tragic, and this really just made the scene even sadder. And Marco says, "This was the greatest week of my life," and Marco tells Jimmy before passing away. And that was just really sad overall. I felt really bad for Jimmy in that scene. He just wanted to help Marco. He wanted to help him turn his life around. And now he can't do that because Marco's dead, and there's nothing he can do now that Marco's dead. And I just felt really sad about it. And I understand Marco was not a huge character. I totally understand that. But they made us care about him so much, and they focused on him so much in this episode. I honestly thought he was going to become a huge part of season 2. I really thought they were going to make him a big part of season 2, but now we know that he's dead and that's not going to happen, and I just felt really bad for him. I mean, can you really blame me? I really did feel bad there. So basically, we then go outside of Marco's funeral, and Jimmy obviously is very devastated at what happened. And basically, outside of Marco's funeral, is twisting a strangely familiar pinky ring around his finger, and it belonged to Marco, and it was given to him by his friend's mother, and it's a really sweet scene overall. Jimmy then takes a call from Kim, and this scene I thought was great. I really did love this next scene because there's so much sadness going on in Jimmy's life. Finally, he actually gets some good news, which I thought was great because he has yet to get any sort of good news in this episode, and I loved this right here. Basically, she informs him that the ballooning size of the Sandpiper Crossing case has led HHM to team up with another firm, Davis and Maine, and she tells him that the partners of Davis and Maine know all about Jimmy, and the firm is going to offer him a partner track position. So he would be able to stay involved in this case if he, wanted to, join this firm. And basically, he'd be in the same case, just a different firm. And she tells him that the partners at Davis and Maine know all about Jimmy, and the firm is willing to offer him a partner track position. And basically, they want to set up a meeting with him later that week. And knowing that she must have pulled some string to make this happen, Jimmy thanks Kim. And we also realize that not only did Kim recommend Jimmy, but Hamlin also recommended him, which I really love seeing. I love seeing this more compassionate side of Hamlin. I love seeing Jimmy actually, I love seeing Hamlin actually care about Jimmy and be nice to Jimmy for once, because we never see that. And I love that we're seeing this now sweeter side of Hamlin. And basically, they know that his Sandpiper home clients love him. And at first, Jimmy's worried about what Chuck would think, but Kim tells Jimmy that Chuck has no say in this. They don't care what he thinks because it's not about what Chuck would think, it's about what Jimmy wants to do. All he has to do is show up at the ABQ courthouse, charm the Davis and Maine attorneys, and the position is his. So I was really happy for Jimmy after all he went through in this episode. It was great that he finally had some happiness there. That was awesome, and I love that. So then we see that back in Albuquerque, Chuck is meticulously instructing Ernesto, the HHM employee tasked with bringing over the supplies Jimmy used to deliver, on the mistakes made during his most recent grocery run. And Jimmy parks his car outside Chuck's house, but doesn't make a move to go inside, and Chuck catches a sight of Jimmy's esteem, but is unable to gather enough courage to open the front door because he doesn't know how Jimmy's going to react, of course, because, Jimmy just took off, so he doesn't know how Jimmy's going to be here. He doesn't know if Jimmy's going to yell at him. He doesn't really know what to expect, and I like this scene. You don't know what's going to happen here. You don't know what Jimmy's going to say to him, but I really love this. And after exchanging hellos with Ernesto, Jimmy drives off, and we basically see that he is just there to check that, to make sure that the deliveries are happening, because he really wants Chuck to, still be able to get the help that he can and do good in his job. And I like seeing that Jimmy wants him to really do well in this job. I definitely enjoyed that. So we get to the last scene of the episode, and Jimmy drives, basically we see that he goes on the road, and it's a new day, and Mike is back to manning his parking booth, and he idly contemplates a crossword puzzle while on the phone with a veterinarian, and Mike agrees to take on another underworld job and jots down the latest class design address, and a car approaches the lot, and Mike raises an eyebrow as Jimmy passes by without acknowledging him. And we see this scene of also, he drives by Mike, and he goes up to, driving, and he gets this moment of, do I actually go in? Should I go in? Is this actually going to happen? We don't know if Jimmy even showed up for the job. We don't know if he showed up. We don't know if the interview went well or went bad, because we then cut directly to the next scene. And I really love that. It's giving us this suspense of, did Jimmy actually go through that? Did he actually go to Davis and Maine and, agree to work with them? Did it actually go well? What happened there? We don't get anything of that. So I'm very interested in seeing what happened there. And basically, he closes his eyes, fills with Marco's pinky ring, and for a moment he stands in the middle of the parking lot. And basically, we then see that he drives back to Mike's booth, and he's true to form. He is without proper validation, and Mike actually seems to be okay with it. And basically, we see that I thought this was a great scene overall. He offers the gate arm and offers to let him let him through for free, which I thought was interesting. And he's surprised that Jimmy didn't stay in the courthouse, not even for 3 minutes, because he didn't stay there. And Jimmy finally asks the question that's eating away at him. When they were working to take down the Kettlemans, they managed to collect the family's 1.6 million stolen from taxes, and they had all the money in cash right in front of them. No one knew about the money's existence, but the two of them, they could have split the money between them and be on their ways. So instead, they decided to take the money back where it belonged. So why didn't Mike just take that money for himself? Which, I mean, that's a good question overall. I can understand why he asked him that. And he even tells Mike that no one on God's green earth knew we had it. They could have split it 50-50. Really, no one would have known about it, so they could have just done it secretly. And he just wants to know why he didn't do it. It's a valid question. I like that he asked him that question because I definitely enjoyed that. And plus, we know what's going on with Mike, and I definitely enjoyed this overall. So he needs to know what Mike's thought process was, and Mike's answer is simple. He was hired to do a specific job, and he was going to complete that job. And Jimmy considers them replies with conviction, and he knows what's stopping. It'll never stop him again. And basically, I thought that was great that he said that. And I'm pretty sure that now he's going to go back to that job. He's going to do what he can. He's a lot more confident about himself. And a lot of people said this. He's starting to transform into Saul. He's starting to transform into that confident guy. And we see him, he's speeding away, he's humming, and we get this kind of sad scene because he's humming Marco's favorite song, Smoke on the Water, and that's basically how the episode ends. We see this smile on his face, and that's how the season ends. So overall, an amazing finale, guys. I loved everything about this finale, but there's a lot to talk about, definitely. Jimmy is now he's transforming into Saul. You can tell, we know that Jimmy's fate, it's Saul. We know what his fate is. We know that he changed his name to Saul Goodman. We know that he opens his own lawyer business. So are we getting close to that point? I mean, we're only on season 2. I'm not going to say we're close to that point. We're not. I mean, I said before, I feel like we're going to start incorporating Breaking Bad into the story, but this is so much not like Breaking Bad that I honestly want to see them do something different. So we'll see what happens there. But are we at that time yet? Are we at that time where it is, is he starting to transform to Saul? I definitely start to see elements of Saul throughout him. And we also saw elements of Slippin' Jimmy in this season as well. So I was wondering if he was going to turn into Slippin' Jimmy in this episode. I mean, there were a lot of possibilities here. Marco, I loved the goodbye to Marco. It was very sad, but it was a very well done goodbye. I really like the way that was done. Really, really well done scene overall. Definitely really enjoyed that. Mike, where do I think we're heading with Mike now? I think Mike is definitely going to continue working at the job. He's going to do what he can for his family. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there. Hamlin, I think Hamlin's going to be a lot nicer to Jimmy. I think Hamlin's going to help out Jimmy more. In fact, I could see Hamlin giving Jimmy really good advice about this new job because Jimmy's obviously on the fence about it. Did he actually go to that job? Did it go well? Did the job interview actually happen? I mean, is he going to reschedule it? What actually happened there? We don't know anything about what happened. So I'm interested in seeing if he actually even went to the job because we don't know anything yet, and I want to know what actually happened there, if he actually went through with it, but we'll see. Let's talk about Chuck. I love that Jimmy cares about Chuck more. I love that he wants to help out Chuck. Is Chuck going to become a successful lawyer? Is he going to work with Jimmy? Is this all going to work out? Is Jimmy okay with Chuck working with him? I kind of feel like that's Jimmy's fear here, is that he doesn't know if Chuck wants to work with him. He doesn't know if it's the best thing to work with Chuck, and he doesn't really even know if Chuck wants to work with him. Because, I mean, after Chuck said what he said, I can totally understand why Jimmy doesn't really think that Chuck wants to work with him. I can totally understand that. I mean, it just after what Chuck said, it's really just like, well, do you want to work with me? Do you not want to work with me? He's really on the fence about what Chuck really wants, and I like seeing that he doesn't really know what Chuck wants right now. But overall, guys, this has been an amazing season, I have to say. I really want to talk about this season overall. One of the things I love about the season is that, as I said, in that bingo scene especially, they always try to incorporate humor into the show, and I love that. It made the show go faster, made me love the show more, and I think as the episodes went on, it just made me love the characters more and more. Now what I want to see next season flashbacks of Jimmy's ex-wife. I mean, that reveal that we got about the whole thing with that whole story about the whole Chicago sunroof, yeah, it was stupid, but we found out that Jimmy has an ex-wife and that she had some sort of lover, and there was a whole thing about that. So I'm wondering if we're maybe gonna see his ex-wife because we don't know who she is, and I'm interested in seeing who his ex-wife is because I want to meet his ex-wife. I don't just want them to bring her up and then just forget about her because I think it's honestly a very interesting plot point if they want to show his ex-wife because I would honestly be interested in meeting his ex-wife. I want to see what happens there. But what do you guys think? Would you be interested in that? I don't know. I at least would be interested. I think it could be really interesting to see what ends up happening. But overall, guys, amazing finale. Absolutely loved everything about this finale. Honestly, this was a perfect finale. It really was. There was nothing wrong with this finale. It was completely perfect, and it was a perfect way to end the first season. But let me know what you guys thought of this first season overall. Is Jimmy turning into Saul? Is he even going to apply for the job? What's going to happen in the next season? I'm very interested in seeing what's going to happen next season, because I honestly don't really know where we're going next season. I like knowing that I don't really know where we're going, because it makes me want to see and more intrigued for the next season. Well, that's my review. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you guys in my next video, which will be my review for tonight's episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.